welcome back to another Python programming tutorial, and today we are going to talk about loops. Now, sorry about that. I don't know why this is coming up here. Now, if you watched my video last time, I talked a little bit about code optimization and how certain things that I did in that trivia game was not a good example. I don't know why this person's flagging me down. Was not a good example of how to properly do things. So today I'm going to show you the idea of what the dry principle is, and then the first programming technique out there to really harness the dry principle. So the dry principle, DRY, stands for don't repeat yourself. And this is a super duper 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 important programming concept, because oftentimes if you start repeating yourself, it's not a when, or excuse me, it's not an if, it's a when. When you want to change slash refactor your code base for something else, right? And it couldn't even be because you made a mistake. It could just be because you want to change something, right? If you repeat yourself, you're going to have to go back and change the code base for all those iterations in which you repeated yourself. So let's go ahead and look at an example. Let's say I want to print hello, right? But instead of printing it once, let's say I want to print it 5 times, right? That's all good, right? When I click hello and it runs here, it's going to print hello 5 times. And I could just call this a day and say, oh, great, awesome sauce. I was able to print hello 5 times, right? And then let's say I take this and this gets integrated with a project that has 50 million lines of code. Well, maybe not 50 million, but thousands of lines of code, and it's duplicated all over the place. And the next programmer on the list is taking my code and he's duplicating it here, but he only wants to print it once. And then I'm coming down here and I'm printing it down here, and I'm going here and here, and we're just creating millions of lines of code, right? And then all of a sudden somebody makes a mistake or they forget to do something, right? And the app stops running. Right, as you can see here, it's starting to get an issue, and then it says there's an issue. And it's hard to figure out, and people are looking through here, right? And as you're trying to debug all this code, your boss walks up to you and says, oh, I see you guys have been using print hello. Don't you know most of our clientele is Spanish? You have to change all those hellos to hola. Now, imagine again that this project wasn't, 99 lines of code, but was, 20,000 or 10,000 lines of code, an actual coding project, right? That would be a catastrophe, if you had to change hello 50,000 times, right? And this is the whole concept behind the dry principle, is if you wanted to refactor that, you would have had to change hello to hola every single time you had the wrong thing there. And then also, if you make an error and you have just ridiculous amounts of lines duplicated, you have to go back and refactor that code for every error as well. So this is why we want to, as much as possible, create code that never repeats itself. Meaning you create code once, and if you feel like you have to copy and paste it, generally speaking, there's a programming technique that will do that for you. Whether it's a for loop, whether it's a class, whether it's a function, whether it's a module, I guarantee you there is something out there, a programming principle technique that allows you to not have to duplicate code. Because if you have code that you duplicate everywhere and you decide to change it, that's no longer good code. It's now a bug, and you now have to go back and track through thousands of lines of code to fix this bug. And it's a real pain in the butt. Just don't put yourself in that situation to begin with. So let's go ahead and look at the very first way you can optimize your code using the dry principle. And that is going to be to use a for loop. Right? A for loop allows you to run whatever code that is inside the for loop a specific amount of times. Right? So for example, let's say again I wanted to print hello world 5 times. Print hello 5 times. That's my goal. Okay? Instead of having to go print, and then do hello, and then do it a whole bunch of times, right? I can use a for loop. So the syntax for loop is as follows. You're going to have for I. Now, This I here is what we call a counter variable. It represents the amount of times the for loop has gone through its iterations. So the first time the for loop goes, I will be 1. Then the second time it goes, I will be 2, I will be 3, I will be 4, and then I will be 5, right? And that's just the most basic way to just describe I. It's a counter variable, right? So we have for I, which represents the current iteration of the for loop, and then we type in range here. Range, or excuse me, it needs to be lowercase range, my mistake. Range is how many times you want this to run. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and put here 1 to 5. Then I'm going to go ahead and put a colon here. Now, as you can see, my text editor is already upset at me because, again, Python deeply cares about indentation. So I need to create an indentation here by clicking tab in order to signify that this is the code I want to run. Now, whatever is in this indentation here, whatever I type, and is going to be what runs. Obviously, none of this is valid code, but as you'll see here, this is going to print hello world to my console window 5 times. And in the situation where I need to change this to something else, for example, hola, it's that easy. Although I think hola is just H-O-L-A. And as you can see, I was able to change it in 2 seconds. And that is the dry principle in action. It's the idea that you want to use programming techniques that essentially run code for you multiple times so you don't have to copy and paste. Because if you start copying and pasting this, if you need to change / refactor your code, it becomes a massive pain to do so. And the dry principle and for loops is a good programming technique to implement the dry principle. Essentially says don't do that for that specific reason. Okay, so again, just to review here, you have I, which is a counter variable. Now here you have a keyword in Python called range, meaning range means something in Python and it's recognized by the Python interpreter. That's what it means to be a keyword, right? Now, normally the range of Python will start at 0, but because I specified 1 here, it's automatically going to set I to 1 and then go up so that it's less than 5. So 5 won't actually be printed here. And I'll actually show you what I mean. Notice this actually only printed 4 times to the window. So let me go ahead and print I for you so we can get a nice little visual representation of I here. Okay. So as you can see, it started at 1. I'll go ahead and drag this over so we can see a little bit better. But it started at 1, went to 2, went to 3, and went to 4. So it printed all the numbers. It started at 1 and printed all the numbers before it hit 5, which are 1, 2, 3, and 4. Does that make sense? So it went through 4 times. So if I wanted this to go through 5 times, I wouldn't start with 1. I would start with nothing here. And this defaults, if there's nothing here, it defaults to that. It will start it automatically at 0, right? So I'll go ahead and just give it a second here. It's working on something. What are we working on? Or maybe this does need to be this. Is it happy now? Oh, I lost Wi-Fi. Great. There we go. Regain my Wi-Fi. There we go. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and print this. And as you can see, it printed 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, which is 5 iterations. And then if I don't have this at all, you'll see I'll get the exact same thing here. As you can see. So if you have nothing in the range, it's automatically going to assume you want to start at 0. And this is going to go through up until 5. Notice 5 is not being printed here. You see that? 5 is not being printed, right? So it's only going up to 5, but not equal to 5, if that makes sense. Okay? And again, I here represents your counter variable. So if you wanted to use I in this loop here, as you can see I'm using, right, then it's going to represent the amount of times this has gone through. So essentially, the first time it goes through, it says, okay, I need to go through this 5 times where I is 0. Okay, so it's going to print 0, and then it's done because there's no other code down here that's indented, right? So then we'll call this the end here. Okay, so it's going to go through once and go, okay, I is 0, print I. That's the end of the for loop. Go back up. Now I is 1. Okay, print 1. It's going to go down. Say, okay, that's the end of that iteration. Then 2, then 3, then 4, and then it's going to end. And that is how you can effectively have code rerun over and over again based on certain things happening, right? So for example, this just makes your code like a lot more efficient. Okay, now the last thing I want to show you is your ability to also have it add and subtract by different numbers here. So this is the starting value. This is what it's going to go up to, right? I can even do 11 here, and then I can also have it skip count by 2 as well, right? So I can go ahead and have this run here, and as you'll see, it'll go 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, and then n because it's skip counting by 2, and then 9 plus 2 is 11, so that's why it ended, because it hit that. It will also end if it goes over 11 as well. So now I get 1, 5, 9. That goes through 3 times because 1 plus, starts with 1, then 1 plus 4 is 5, then 5 plus 4 is 9, then 9 plus 4 is 13, which is greater than 11, so it stops. And that is the introduction to a for loop. This is one of the most used Python things in the world and one of the most used concepts and programming techniques out there in the world. So you will need to know this one. Okay, so please, if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments, and next we'll talk about while loops.